Hey, what's up, you guys? This is AJ. Welcome back to another video. So, in the previous videos, we made the enemy come and attack the player, then we set up the character death animation and all those stuff. In this video, we're gonna do the same, but we're gonna do the player attack the enemy, then we're gonna set up an death animation for the enemy, and yeah, this is basically what is gonna happen. So this player has defeated the enemy. The enemy is gonna lay there for a few seconds, and it's gonna disappear. Or I'm just gonna use a kind of pooling, if you may. So the enemy disappeared right now, but it is gonna appear somewhere else on this map. So we are not killing, or I mean actually destroying any game objects here. We're just gonna use the game objects that we have in this scene and then just spawn them elsewhere or reposition them once they're dead, so that this, I think, is gonna improve the performance of the game than if we just destroy the enemy game object and instantiate a new enemy every time an enemy dies. So without further ado, let's get started. So guys, in the character script, this is what we use to make the enemy target a player and update the target once the player that the enemy was targeting before died or something. So we're going to need a similar way of player to target enemies. So here we're just going to copy this and change this to player controller player in the list we have got here, players. So if the player has not locked onto any target, that's why we got is target locked and an exclamation over here. And if the enemies list doesn't contain the specific enemy anymore, I think that should be changing over here. And here it's good. This should be player dot get lock target, and these red lines that we are having over here and in this method is because we haven't made any of these methods in the player controller yet, but I'm just going to edit this here, then go to the player controller and make it, so it'll be good. And here should be player, and here we are going to update the player controller for the nearest target, and instead of enemy we're going to pass in player. It's just going to give us an error again, but we'll check that up later. So if we go to the player controller script, let's make those methods here. So first we are gonna have a variable boolean Let's say this is target locked, and this is just one of the instances where the player is not gonna work the same as the enemy, because in case of player we wanna just target the nearest player, I mean nearest enemy. We don't want to lock on to that target. So if anything changes in the scene and a new enemy comes closer to the player is going to target that enemy, unless if we are wanting to specifically target an enemy, like in case of boss fights and all. And in that case, I'm just going to make the player click on that enemy to target it. So that's something we need to implement later. Right now, we're just going to make the player target the nearest enemy, whoever comes closer to the player. But I'm just gonna make a boolean of type is target locked and a method to get the locked target, just so that we can use it later. Say this target locked, and in this we are just gonna return is target locked. Now we wanna make a field of type enemy controller, so that we can return the targeted enemy, and let's call it nearest target. And here in a method of type enemy controller, we're just gonna return that. Let's call it get target. Return nearest target. Now let's say we want to update the nearest target in every frame. So let's say public void update nearest target. And here we are going to be passing in enemy controller, call it nearest target. And we're just going to update the nearest target in this class. So this dot nearest target equals nearest target. Now if we go back to the characters script, everything is should be fine except the get lock target. That's because we named the method as get target, and that's because we are not gonna specifically lock onto any target unless the player clicks on them. So yeah. Now I'm gonna change this method and make it of type game object, so that both player as well as enemy can use this method to update the nearest target. And it is going to take a parameter of type game object. So here let's call it character. So this is not going to be anything specific, player or enemy, both comes to this method. And here we use a switch to switch to a new method. If the player wants to find the enemy, or if the enemy wants to find the player, we go to the respective methods. So I'm gonna create a method for both of those. Say private player controller find nearest player, and this method is gonna take in an enemy controller, and let's call it enemy. So this is going to take in an enemy controller, so an enemy. Then it is going to find the nearest player to that enemy and return it here. So we are going to cut the entire thing from here, paste it here, and yeah, I think we'll be good for that. Now let's copy this method, paste it again over here. Here I just paste it 2 times. Okay. Now this method is going to be called find the nearest enemy, and it is going to return an enemy controller, and it's going to take a player controller. So let's call it player. Actually, I think I can rename it to player. Okay. I think that just renamed it here as well. Yeah, I'm just going to rename it here. And here it's going to be enemy controller nearest enemy for each enemy and enemies. Load distance, find distance, enemy, comma player. Actually, we need to change this to enemy. No, actually this should be player controller. So we pass in a player, then we find the nearest enemy to that player, then return that enemy controller. Yeah, that's what we're doing. So here it's going to be nearest enemy, and nearest enemy is going to be enemy. Then we just need to return nearest enemy. Okay, sounds about right. And in the find distance method, we kind of don't want to change anything. We're going to pass in enemy, then player, because here we are using first enemy controller, then player controller. And it is not going to make a change, because if you find the distance from enemy to player or player to enemy, both are going to be same. So that's why we don't need to change anything over here. Now in the find nearest target method, I'm going to create a game object. Let's call it target and set it to null. Then let's say switch character dot tag case player. So in case it is a player, we want to set the target to the nearest enemy to that player. Target equals find nearest enemy. Then we're gonna send in character dot get component player controller. Then we break nearest enemy character dot get component. That's right here. Now implicitly convert type enemy controller to Unity engine dot game object. Okay. Actually, we want to set the target as a game object. So here what we are returning is an enemy controller nearest enemy is an enemy controller. That's why we are gonna get this error. So we just want to add this dot game object, and it should be fine. Okay. Next, let's just copy this. Actually, then paste it here. We want to change this to enemy, and we want to change this to enemy controller. We want to change this to find the nearest player, and we should be fine. Now we are gonna just return target So the reason why we are gonna get this error over here is because the update nearest target in player is gonna take a player controller is gonna take a enemy controller as a parameter, and in the enemy controller it is gonna take a player controller as a parameter. So we just gotta use dot get component enemy controller over here, and we are gonna need to send in an game object. So player.game object, and here also let's say we send an enemy.game object, and then we pass in get component player controller. Okay. So guys, if you remember, we had a target field in the fighter script, and this is what we were using to make the player target the punching bag or the capsule in the scene. So earlier we were just dragging and dropping the capsule onto this field, but now since we got a way of setting up an enemy target, we can actually use it. So we are going to just set target equal to get component player controller, and in player controller we just made a get target method to get the nearest target, which is going to return an enemy controller. So we can use that, and we are going to need to add dot game object because target is a game object, and we basically just want to get the game object onto which the enemy controller is attached to. So that's what's going on here. So in the health script, I'm gonna add a line, and this is just gonna randomly set a position up on the map. I hope that the boundaries, I hope the random position doesn't come out of the boundaries of the map. I have just set it to -100 to 100 on X and Z axis, and on the Y axis, the position is gonna remain the same. And this is what we are gonna use to make the enemy port or travel to a different place once it has died and a certain time has passed on. So we don't want the enemy to stay dead. We wanna slowly increase the health of the enemy. And in the previous video, we kind of set up how to resurrect a dead player. So we can use the same mechanics over here, but we are just gonna make a new position for the enemy to move towards once he's got to 80% of his health, and then just set the transform dot position of the enemy onto the new position. Here we are going to use random dot range, and for using this we are going to need Unity engine, using Unity engine or at the top. So this is just going to set a random position on X and Z axis for the enemy to transport to on the map. And since we are going to do it only for the enemy, we are going to need to add a check here if tag equals enemy. Then we just set up a new position and for the enemy there once it has been resurrected. Okay. Now in the enemy controller script, I have kind of also added this line of code to stop the enemy from doing anything once it is dead. So in one of our previous videos, we made a script. We made a method in the health script to check if a player is dead or not. We can kind of use the same method for the enemy as well because the enemy is going to use the same health script as the player. So here we are going to check get component health is dead, and if the enemy is dead, we just return. Oh, I think we can also just set the damage agent on the enemy to disable. So let's say get component mesh agent. So for using mesh agent, we are gonna need to add Unity engine.ai. Say using Unity engine.ai. Okay. Dot, let's say enabled equals false. And yeah, once the enemy has been resurrected, we want to set it back to 2 again. So let's add this here in the health script as well. Now another thing I have added is in the health bar, I just added this code here to make the health bar disappear once the enemy is dead. So here we're just gonna check health component, which we were kind of already using to get the local scale on the foreground to go. So health component dot is dead. Health component is just an instance of the health script, by the way. So health component dot is dead. Then game object dot set active equal to false. That's gonna make the health bar disappear, and else game object dot set active equal to true. This is gonna make it come back on when the enemy has been resurrected. So with all this done, now let's hop into Unity and check this out. Now guys, back in Unity, we just need to set all these players, the tag to player, and in the enemy, we just need to select everything and set tag as enemy. Yeah, I'm just gonna try and kill this enemy, and it's dead. The health bar has gone off. As you can see, it's gonna play the death animation, and after a few seconds, it is gonna disappear or port the enemy somewhere else on the map. So let's go on there, I think. Oh, actually, that's because the enemy was walking to this lava pool, and the lava pool hurts the enemy as well, I think. So yeah, that's why that enemy just died. As you can see, the enemy here has disappeared, and we got an enemy far away. I think that's one of the enemy that we killed just got resurrected. So let's go ahead and kill it again. I think this is fun. And I think holding this sword and shield is giving this character a speed boost. Why this character is running faster. So without this, it's gonna be much slower. That's something we have set up in one of the previous videos. Go make sure to check that out. That was really fun. So guys, if you like this video, give me a thumbs up and let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Go ahead and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, because that's gonna help me a lot. Until next time, see you, bye.